Hello and thank you for joining me on the History of Bangalore. I'm Ramjee Chandran and today I'm on episode 104 of season 2, the last episode of this season. It's a recap episode. Before I get into it, I want to say something briefly. When I began season 2, we were standing at the edge of the Vijayanagara Empire, watching it shrink, watching its vassals begin to think for themselves, and a minor chieftain named Kempe Gowda receiving a grant on a granite plateau on which he built something that became the bone of contention repeatedly. I'm now ending season 2 at the point when Hyder Ali's army, nearly 100,000 strong, descended from that same plateau, sweeping into the Carnatic, taking on the British forces who were scrambling to respond. It's just 243 years of history. It's just one city. And this episode is take a deep breath and cover everything that happened in season 2. Before I get there, as always, a special word of thanks to my sponsors, the Prestige Group. They have been with me for 2 seasons right now and will be there for a 3rd. I'm grateful because they believe in the city, they believe in its history, and they make it possible for me to bring you this podcast. Building cities one landmark at a time, they transform dreams into reality. You can be a part of the future. Simply add prestige to your life. Let's get into it. Let's pedal all the way back to the year 1537. The site of Bangalore, which was not yet a city, it was just a plateau, elevated, exposed, with no significant river. There were some streams or some things that you might call a river, but not enough to support a huge population. Nowhere near a natural harbor, without any of the normal geographic endowments that typically explain why cities rise where they do. Now we had the Arakavati that ran nearby, and the tributaries could be dammed into tanks. But there was no obvious reason looking at the land why this particular spot should become anything at all, because these rivers, Vrishabhavati and Arakavati, they didn't really feed a large population as a major river like the Ganges or the Seine or one of the major world rivers could do. Kempe Gowda I saw something in it anyway. What he saw was defensive logic. The elevation, nearly 1,000 meters above sea level, meant that any army approaching Bangalore would be climbing. The plateau itself was bordered by passes and ghats that could be monitored and controlled. Not to forget the Navadurgas, those giant 9 rocks on top of which forts were built, providing some kind of a lookout over the entire plateau and making sure that any approaching army could only operate between them, making it easier to defend the land. It was also a land that could be farmed because the tanks that were built could sustain a population even if there were no major rivers. And the distance from the coast meant that the distance from the maritime powers that were already beginning to reshape the politics of the peninsula took a while before they could reach inland. Kempe Gowda built a mud fort. He laid out a pete, the market town, on a grid with streets for weavers, oil pressers, flour sellers, merchants, and all of this was according to what had been prescribed centuries ago in the Arthashastra. His successor erected 4 towers at cardinal points of the territory because it was a mud fort, and having these watchtowers would give them early warning for any pending attack. It was a modest beginning, but it was a beginning with a very clear intention behind it, an intention that has proved fruitful to this day. The pete, the Bangalore pete, was the key. In its very first years of its existence, it was a market city, a market town, with 8 gates that led into the major trade routes, with everything inside supporting trade. Everything was trade-focused. When it started to get militarized, there was a fort that was built inside an already fortified pete. But Bangalore was not merely a garrison. It was a place where things were made and sold because of commerce. Craft communities settled along streets organized by trade. Silk weavers, basket weavers, all kinds of people, metal workers. Revenue flowed in from the Hublis, and these were the revenue districts that surrounded the city. There were 11 of them, which all formed a part of what politically was called Bangalore at that point, which the city is now growing to fill still. A fort protected the pete. The pete funded the fort. The two were inseparable from the beginning, And that relationship between the city's military function and the commercial one would define Bangalore for the next 2.5 centuries. When Kempe Gowda II, Immadi Kempe Gowda, added gopuras to the temples that his father had built, he was doing something more than an act of piety. He was signaling permanence. These were not structures of someone who had a passing interest in the city. They were the structures of a city that had intended to remain. Bengaluru had been attacked in 1612 by some rival Palegars, and that was pretty easily handled. But the first serious battle of Bengaluru came in 1638 when Shahaji Bhonsle, father of Shivaji, and the deputy commander of the Bijapur army laid siege to Bangalore, defeated it and took it. And then the city passed from the Kempe Gowda lineage into Bijapur's administrative orbit. Shahaji was granted Bengaluru as his personal Jagir. He moved in there, set up a palace, and governed it with a competence that sources acknowledge, and he left its mark on the physical landscape and also its culture. The significance of 1638 is not what Shahaji did to Bangalore. It's what the siege confirmed. Bangalore was a prize worth taking. It was an object of desire. A power that controlled the Deccan wanted it. And that was in itself a measure of what the city had become just 1 century into its existence. And then that pattern would repeat. In 1687, the Mughals under Qasim Khan took Bangalore from the Bijapur successor states. In the same year, Chikkadevaraja Wadeyar, who also had designs on it, bought it. And he paid a sum of 3 lakh hanas, a sum that was not sentimental but great calculation. And what he bought for that was the pete and all the 12 hublis that came with it. Chikkadevaraja Wadeyar understood what that city was worth strategically. He needed it to be a part of Mysore. In fact, had been one to explain it to the Mughal court years before purchase, when he argued that whoever held Bengaluru had the key to the Mysore plateau. So according to Chikkadevaraja Wadeyar, fortifying Bengaluru and keeping it well garrisoned was the first line of defense against anyone trying to attack the capital, which was Srirangapatna. Then Chikkadevaraja proceeded to act on that argument. He converted that mud fort into stone. That oval plan, the round towers, the cavaliers, the deepened moat. Now these were not aesthetic choices. These were the choices made by that king who expected that the city would be attacked again and again, and he wanted it to survive. He was right on every count. Let's take a small break, a 30-second commercial break, and then I will rush back with the rest of the recap right after this.
Maximum connectivity, maximum luxury, maximum lifestyle. Live your max at Prestige Raintree Park. Opulent residences nestled in 21 acres of breathtaking landscape with 1 lakh plus square feet of clubhouse, 3 swimming pools, and ample leisure and sports amenities. Experience exquisite living at Prestige Raintree Park in prime Whitefield with schools, offices, hospitals, and shopping malls just a hop away. Call 81399 81399 or visit prestigeconstructions.com to know more. RADA approved.
In its history, the kingdom of Mysore, when it passed from Chikkadevaraja Wadeyar's hands into the hands of less capable kings, it slipped through their hands and into the hands of 2 Dalabais, Nanjarajaya and Devarajaya, who pretty much ruled the kingdom. Hyder Ali was a protege of Nanjarajaya, and in due course of time, Hyder Ali received Bengaluru as a Jagir in 1759 because that was his reward for defeating the Maratha commander, Gopal Hari. The city was already a fortified administrative center of considerable significance. In Hyder's hands, Bengaluru blossomed. It grew. What Hyder did was to transform it into something this whole subcontinent had not previously seen, a military-industrial complex. The fort was rebuilt and expanded. The pete was enclosed with a ditch and thorny hedges, which served very well because men, horses could not cross that. And then, one of Hyder's most important armaments factories, he called all these factories Taramandalas, the arsenal at Taramandala Pete inside the Bengaluru Pete became one of the most sophisticated weapons manufacturing facilities in Asia. You might remember that I told you about this boring machine that was capable of producing 50 muskets and a cannon simultaneously, the one that was powered by 2 bullocks and produced armaments at a rate that no other Indian city was doing or could even match. And then there was the mint that issued coins. Then there was a brass cannon foundry and the 4 Taramandala facilities across the kingdom, of which Bengaluru was the largest and the most productive. Let's not also forget that this was an R&D center because it contributed very, very heavily to the development of the Mysore rocket. Now, rocketry was not unknown in history. For centuries, the Chinese have known it, but they used bamboo, they used paper, compressed paper. But what the Bangalore factory did for Mysore was to create these rockets in iron cases, which meant that they had longer ranges and more powerful than anything the British had carried into the field. It was developed and manufactured right here in the city. It was also the site of the first cantonment, Kalasipadaya. This was the first cantonment of Bengaluru because it had cavalry, barracks, stables, military law. 300 French hussars, the first European garrison in the city's history, arrived in 1761 and remained there till the kingdom fell in 1799. The first European cantonment was not as we think the cantonment as we know it today, but one which was in the Pete or right outside it, because Tipu and then Hyder made sure that the Europeans had land on which they built their own homes by their own designs. Larger plot sizes, broader roads, European style. Those houses have disappeared from view because after the British had taken over the land, they made significant alterations to Bengaluru, damaged a large part of the fort, and the Pete took down the walls. And in the course of all those things, they probably took down all those European houses because they needed no more. They had already built a cantonment nearby. That's my logic, and that's what I think happened. But the houses may have gone, but not the memory. It remained in history as the first cantonment. The city that Kempe Gowda had built as a market town, think about it, had become under Hyder Ali the arsenal of a state that was fighting the most important, powerful commercial empire in the world. 6 times in its history, by the end of our season 2, armies had moved against Bengaluru, or at least attempted to. The Palegar coalition in 1612, number 1. Shahaji Bhonsle in 1638, number 2. The Third Battle of Bengaluru, Qasim Khan in 1687. Then the British in 1767, the 4th attempt. It never reached the walls, but it doesn't mean that there was no battle, because Hyder Ali had won the battle by dissolving the coalition of the British that was supposed to make it possible. And then the 5th Battle of Bengaluru, 1768, the one that came closest, that positioned siege guns at Hoskote and waited for an opening, that again never came, because Hyder Ali charged back from Bangalore faster than the British had anticipated and stripped the countryside bare in a scorched earth policy and did not let the British even get to attack Bangalore. So many battles of Bangalore were non-battles. They were battles, but there was no fighting. Now let's take stock of the situation. 6 attempts, 6 battles of Bengaluru, and barring Shahaji Bhonsle and the Bijapur Sultanate, the city had not fallen to any of them. Now that record is not accidental. It reflects something that every successive ruler of Bengaluru has understood and acted upon, that the city's value was inseparable from its defensibility, and that defensibility required continuous investment. Kempe Gowda built the mud fort. Chikkadevaraja rebuilt it in stone. Hyder Ali reinforced the stone fort, deepened the moats, added cavaliers, enclosed the Pete, stationed a permanent garrison, and then built a military-industrial complex that made the fort a base of operations rather than merely a refuge. Each ruler inherited a city and left it more formidable than they found it. There is one more thread worth pulling before I close this season. Bengaluru's transformation from an empty plateau to a contested strategic prize was not merely a military story, it was also a commercial one. The Pete that Kempe Gowda laid out in the 16th century grew in over 250 years into a trading center of regional significance. Silk, cotton, sandalwood, weapons, armaments under Hyder Ali. The large scales in Dodapete that completely altered the way business was done. The customs stations, the road tolls, the trading factories in Oman, And I remind you, the word factories here doesn't mean manufacturing, it just means trading offices that connected Mysore to the Arabian Sea. The city made money. The money funded the fort and the fort protected the money. This was a self-fulfilling loop, and it had been running efficiently for 240 years by the time Hyder Ali even assembled the army on the plateau in 1780. That army, 90,000 men, rockets, French hussars, a century of accumulated military knowledge, and the product of a military-industrial complex and the country's very first defense science facilities that continues to this day if you think about it. That army was the product of everything the city had become. And when that huge force swept from the plateau down, descended into the Carnatic, it very nearly broke the British in Bangalore. And if events of history had happened by just a few more ticks on a clock, it would have meant a completely different story. And that is the story that I will tell in Season 3. My next episode will be the opening of Season 3, when I will take you through the death of Hyder Ali and all the intrigues following that. And then we move on to the most controversial ruler the Mysore kingdom had ever seen, Tipu Sultan. The story of Bengaluru is not finished. It is in many ways only beginning. The city that Kempe Gowda built on an empty plateau will face its greatest test in the decades ahead. It will fall, it will be rebuilt, it will be contested, garrisoned, transformed, and contested again. Please stay tuned. Visit me in Season 3. I am Ramjee Chandran, and this is the history of Bangalore.